Achieveradio.com.
Welcome to hour number 2 of Masterful Choices, where choice really matters. I'm Monique Chapman, your host. I converse with established and upcoming conscious leaders in the fields of human potential, intuition, spirituality, and metaphysics, providing empowering information for you to live a 5-star balanced life. When you were born, you came to Earth with everything you needed to make life a success. Together, let's discover your pathway to greater success. To find out more about me, upcoming show guests, the classes, consultations, energy work, and holistic healings that I provide, visit my website, MoniqueChapman.com. Now, I've been told by my clients that I keep it real while providing accurate information and profound deep healings as they face the lessons they agreed to learn in this particular lifetime. Do remember to like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and connect with me on LinkedIn. My opt-in newsletter, Healing News, is available through my website, MoniqueChapman.com, or you can join from my Facebook page. In this hour, we have William J. Hall coming up, and he is the author of The World's Most Haunted House. Now, if you'd like to be a participant in tonight's show, give me a call at 602-666-6027. Again, that number is 602-666-6027. Once you're in the system, press star 5. That puts your name up on the board, and that way I can see you and call on you. Now, you can watch me on Achieve TV. You can hit me up in the chat room or send me an quick message from the Achieve Radio homepage. My guest this hour, William Hall, was born and raised in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the events of this book took place. He watched the news coverage of the Lindley St hauntings on TV when he was 10 years old. Bill is professionally equipped to recognize trickery. After more than 25 years of performing as a magician, he knows how to create and recognize illusions. He is experienced in researching the unexplained, from folklore and urban legend to fortune-telling, the pyramids, and other mysterious tales. His syndicated 1990s column, Magic and the Unknown, ran for 6 years in multiple local newspapers in his home state. He currently resides in the state of Connecticut. Welcome to Masterful Choices, Bill.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you. As I shared with you in an email, your book scared the crap out of me. I mean, just reading it, and I knew it was real, but it wasn't going to come to my house. But still, I'm kind of looking over my shoulder, what's going on. So congratulations on writing a book that would really allow someone to think and be a little bit fearful.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. With everything that you have accomplished in your life so far, what led you to write this book about this particular haunting?
I actually kind of fell into it. Even though, of course, I was always curious and interested in this kind of stuff, and I wasn't closed-minded to it. I was pretty sure it probably existed as far as hauntings, and I was always interested in believed in UFOs and that kind of thing from government documents and whatnot. Hauntings, I was, I never had experience myself, but I knew enough people who did. So, but what happened with this is I was simply having coffee one morning, messing around on, reading my Wall Street Journal, or actually maybe it was Facebook. Yeah, it was Facebook. I'm only kidding.
Close. Wall Street Journal, Facebook. Hey, close.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
but and somebody just put up on a community page. Does anybody remember the haunted house on Lindley Street? And it occurred to me that that was something I never looked into. So I wasn't looking at it as, oh, maybe I could write a book on it. I was just doing what I usually did, poke around at these things because I'm curious, and started reading newspaper articles on the event because it went around the world back in 1974, and I remember it being the talk of the town for many, many years as I grew up. And I simply read a bunch of these newspaper articles, and I was just so intrigued by the type of witnesses and the volume of witnesses. We had police officers, reporters, firefighters, priests, neighbors, and hundreds of onlookers that saw things, and there was over 2,000 outside of the house at its peak. So I was very intrigued in that. Of course, the newspaper only makes you ask more questions. It's not going to give you the ultimate answers, but that was the place to start. And so that's really what initially got me going deeper into it.
Okay. Well, the house is 966 Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. At the time, did anybody think to stop and look at the numerology around that 966?
I haven't heard anything like that. I mean, at the time, the prevailing theory, at least, there was a few theories back then. The parapsychologist theory, which would say it's reoccurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, and then there were, the Warrens and the priests who would say, it's a demon, and there wasn't a lot of in between as far as those that were at Lindley Street. I know a lot of fans and listeners and people would message me. Of course, everybody brings that up. What if the 9 was loose on a nail and fell over, and things like that.
Well, I hadn't even thought about it that way. I was just thinking 966. The 666 is a sign of the devil. The 9, is a kind of like a relative in a sense. And I was just thinking that maybe just from the get-go, it was a place for that type of energy just to seek comfort, not necessarily comfort the residents in the house, but that type of energy to seek comfort. Now, the stories, and I don't want to give the whole thing away because, folks, it's a page turner. It's a very easy read. I read it in 2 settings, and it goes very quickly. You're not going to be bored, and it's just the right, in my opinion, the right writing tempo to keep people engaged. So Jerry and Laura were the parents in the home, and then they had a baby, and the baby turned out to be like Down syndrome baby, and unfortunately the child later in life passed away. And then they adopted a little girl, and that's about all that I want to give away about that particular story. Did the parents ever stop to consider that with adopting, what's her name, Marcy, or Marcia, but she'd like to be called Marcy, that it could be Jerry's and Laura's son, the junior, that was creating the activity?
Yes. Of course, they had many theories. One of the prevalent theories that Jerry used to say, the father, as he used to say, it was the underground spring that ran under the house. And then at times he thought perhaps it was some sort of spirit or evil spirit, or perhaps, like he was quoted saying, the work of a spoiled child, that, maybe it was the prior child. I mean, they really were at their wits' end with just trying to figure out what it was, because they really didn't believe in the supernatural at all. At least, until they were in the middle of this and had to kind of start considering all sorts of theories. But that certainly was one of the theories. I personally, I don't know if I really give that much weight to it, but there certainly was that kind of negative energy and tension in the home, even without a poltergeist, between an adoption, Marcy being picked on, and then being in that tiny house with the overbearing and overprotective parents because they had Jerry
You
Jr.
had it
that
right
died,
first time. Overbearing, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and it was, both at the same time in this tiny little bungalow that's 738 square feet. I mean, imagine being stuck 6 weeks, with the mother. I mean,
No.
she had a good heart. She meant well, but she was, neurotic and, very, high strung.
And I think you're being kind. I really think you're being kind because my two takeaways from the book was, number one, well, I have children, they're adults, but if I had a baby or a young child in my house again, I would make sure that it's loved and had plenty of people to interact and play with. And number two, I'm not getting a cat. Because
Yeah,
that cat
you're
in
right,
that
yeah.
home, and cats are notorious for tapping into the spiritual and assisting spirits in and out of 3D. So I think that if the knowledge that is available now was available in 1974, a whole different outcome might have happened, for those folks at that home. Um,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, we didn't even think. Well, I'm including myself in it. I wasn't, but back then it wasn't really thought of in a much broader sense of looking at other houses and things of that nature. Back then it was we didn't really see the connection between other paranormal occurrences and things like that. So it was more limited in thinking, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could just deal with the knowledge you have at the time, and they definitely did. What
Yeah.
really surprised me, was the level of the poltergeist activity because refrigerators moved, and they just didn't like move an inch. They turned 35 degrees from where it was and went and stood in front of a door. A heavy table tipped over several times. The TV fell on, I think it was Laura's foot, wasn't it, and broke her
Laura,
toes.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I mean, these are things. It's not like, well, maybe the book moved on the shelf or something that you
Right.
could question. These are very obvious actions that took place, and nobody could understand it. Frankly, I wouldn't have stayed there. I would have found a relative, homeless shelter, someplace to go. I wouldn't have stayed there. So why don't you share with the audience as much of the background as you would like to without giving the book away? Because, folks, this is a really good book. It's available every place, so go get it. It's The World's Most Haunted House by William J. Hall. It's a true story, but it's a page turner, and you will absolutely love it. So,
Thank you.
Bill, why don't you share some, what you'd like to share to get the audience all enthused and ready to go out and hit Amazon in 5 minutes and buy this book?
Oh, sure. um, well, what really drew me to this case is it was like the Roswell of haunted houses. I mean, it was a case of the paranormal that got so public, much more public than these things usually ever get. When you talk about, at the height, 2,000 people outside the house, traffic backed up for over a mile in every direction. The street had to be barricaded the next day to keep cars off it.
Mm-hmm.
Dogs and paddy wagons, arrests, vigils outside. I mean, this was growing and growing because there was just so many witnesses, policemen going in and out, and firemen, and of course, as the story gets told, and the neighbors hear, and it just kind of has this natural social media to it. And then of course the media picks up on it. So it has that whole element to it, which makes it quite an event, an unfortunate one for the family, because not only did they have to put up with what was going on in the house, but they had to put up with the judge and jury of the public, and all of that. Not having peace outside the house or at work or anywhere. So that was unfortunate. The other thing was a very, very intense few days of poltergeist activity. I mean, the entire paranormal activity would be from 1968, after coinciding shortly after with Marcy being adopted, up until 1975. But I mean, the real explosion of activity was really those few days. So, and it's interesting in all my research. I mean, time and time again, we all say we'd leave the house, and I still believe, knowing what I know now, I would. But it's always hard to predict what you do. But I'm like, yeah, I'm with you, Monique. I think I'd leave. But I find in actuality, that usually doesn't happen. Now, the thing is, the family did leave the house a number of times and stayed with family, or when they were there, sometimes Marcy was away, so that, she wasn't in the midst of it. But during when the activity was at its height, there were a lot of people in the house. So even when they did not go away, they had, policemen in the house. The Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren from Conjuring fame, listeners may know them from, they were in the house a good amount of time with Father Charbonneau, the priest there, and Paulino, the seminary student at the time. So they had a lot of people with them. They weren't alone in the house. So I think, during those intense times when people were around, there probably wasn't as much need, of course, to, have to leave the house, because you had a lot of, support and, people there. And even though things were moving and stuff, there wasn't things whacking people in the head nonstop. It wasn't like that.
Yeah.
But what was amazing about the activity is most of the time in, poltergeist situation, or even other kinds of haunting situations, it's not like you can have, 6, 7, 8 people walk in a house and be in every room and have activity just going on. That's more unusual, especially when you first enter the environment. It almost kind of simmers down and and everything has to kind of settle before, anything happens. And of course, sometimes you have to wait quite a while. As you know, these things aren't, on our timetable. But in this situation, to have it was so intense that there were people in multiple officers in multiple rooms with things happening in every room at the same time. So I mean, this was very intense for a poltergeist kind of manifestation. And some people have theorized that it wasn't just a poltergeist. Some people believe that the poltergeist is from, the psychokinetic energy, which then opens up, quote unquote, portal, dimension, world, whatever you want to call it. And there were entities involved in this case. And from what I understand, at least some theorize that that's not always the case. And others would theorize that they're all entities, and the scientific reachings of parapsychology is a little shortcoming in trying to explain this kind of phenomena, that it's more of like the multiple universe theory, or the parallel world theory, and that kind of thing. And it's if you ask me, I think the multiverse theory is probably the best, but I can see a lot of times, it's interesting because a lot of times we're talking, we're saying it differently, but I see a lot of commonality to the different theories even. So, I have a pretty easy time, being able to not be that critical of any particular theory, because I do see that it looks many times that they're more related than we think. I mean, even people, I don't believe they're demons, but I mean, in our primitive language, I guess you can call them that as well as anything else. But I don't like to label something as evil based on our limited experience with them. You know what I mean? I mean, we don't even know if they want to be here. You know, these entities in this case. I mean, you know, did they ask? Did they ask to be here? I don't know. Maybe not. You know.
Yeah, but then
Or
why can't they just go? You know, I mean,
well,
what?
we
What?
don't know. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, and that, yeah, that's the thing. We don't know. And I'm not
Hmm.
saying that they don't want to be here. I really don't know. I do know that they didn't necessarily cause that final piece that, you know, that opened the door. You know, I mean,
Hmm.
if anything, you can say the family caused it. You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
I think Mama had a lot to do with it. I
yes,
truly
I'm
do.
sure she did. Yeah,
Well, and I think that because of, the fact you were just talking about, entities and all that, and everything boils down to it's a form of energy, some form or another.
right.
And with the mother being so high strung, I guess it's a nice word to use, so overprotected, it had to be her way or the highway, and she really had a really tight ship going on there that, all that pent up energy, it just had no place to go except into things so it could express itself. I
Yeah,
just
and there
feel
was.
that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, yeah, and there was just a lot going on. I mean, you know, being adopted itself is a big deal, and then her being
Hmm.
so introverted, Marcy, is another big deal, and then being picked on and beat up at school is another big deal, and then the mother's another, you know,
Yeah,
so there
and
was,
the biggest deal on top of all of that, I thought was Marcy was Canadian Indian, correct? If I remember
yes,
correctly, and
yeah,
then the
yeah, Five
mother was
Nations, in
half American Indian, or was she
uh,
just
Bohemian
okay?
Cherokee, yeah,
Okay. And so even that energy, and I love Native Americans, so don't give me hate mail, but just the energy of the little girl perhaps being able to tap into her ancestral energy, because she used to sit and talk to her grandfather on the rug. So, I think there's a lot of things that kind of came together for this energy to um, just develop in the house. But the one thing that really saddened me in your book, and it's a true story, so it's saddened I think a lot of people, is that they believed that all this activity was Marcia's fault, and they even got her to confess that she did all of this activity because she was caught tipping a table over when she thought no one was looking at her. I mean, my goodness, how can they blame all that on such a small child with all the activity? I mean, there was something going on in each corner of every room in the house. She couldn't have controlled all of that.
right, and of course the police knew that. You know, not the officer that actually, you know, caught her with her. It was her toe, poking a TV, and she even said when she was asked, "Why are you doing that?" She said, "I want to see if the demon would do something." So, but
Mhm.
you know, when they is seeing what those guys saw Tuesday morning and not being in the house when, you know, it was at the height of the activity, you know, they can come to that conclusion, and I can understand that because if that's all you see, you know, that's what you're going to go with. But when they called it in, the inspector who was thrown, you know, those files to kind of clean up the mess, I mean, he knew it was real.
Mhm.
So, you know, so they really weren't looking to go back into facts and say, well, how did this happen? How did that? I mean, they knew it was
Mhm.
real. And, and as Inspector Clark told Jerry Sullivan, the fellow from Duke University that went to talk to the inspector, you know, he said, "I'm sorry, Jerry, you know, I did the best I could with what I had." I mean, he was told to close the case, and the case was going to be
Mhm.
closed. And there's no way they're going to come out and say, "Hey, guess what, everybody? This is real." you know,
Yeah,
it's
especially
just,
not back then. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just not really a conclusion that you can come to with the kind of mayhem that was going on there. I mean, you know, the arrest, and I'm not saying everybody was violent or anything, but the thing was a huge paying for the Bridgeport Police Department. It was expensive. It was tying up resources. It was making the superintendent look bad. I mean, you wanted his city back. It was just a really crazy situation that you don't often, you hardly ever see. I mean, even with some very public cases like the Enfield poltergeist was relatively public, but to have thousands of people outside a house, I mean, that's really not common,
Yeah, especially in such a small town, it's just not common, almost not feasible. It's a miracle that people would, that many people would fit in that tiny little area. Now, all of this happened back in the month of November, am I correct?
Yes, that when it publicly, it all happened in November 1974.
Okay, so maybe they thought there's something, some type of portal opened Halloween, where it opened the door Halloween, and all of November came to stay, and then, vanished almost as quickly as it came.
Yeah, it's strange. I'm involved in a case now, and it seems the activity there kind of picks up October, November. More in the winter than but I don't know. And then other times, I hear that's not the case at all. It's year round or whatever. But for the good uns, I know even the noises that started in 1971 were mostly around October, November, for the most part. So, some say it coincides with, the son's birthday, but because he was a Halloween baby. But I don't know. It may not. I don't really make a conclusion as to that personally. I simply don't know. But there's a lot of great theories out there. It's would have been really interesting to know more about Marcy's real parents and family in Canada. To your point, to know more about that. I mean, it looked like she was possibly, abused. They said they tied her to a chair and things like that. And, we don't really know. We don't have a lot of contact. She was the youngest of 9 children, so we don't know if they tied her to a chair because they couldn't manage her, or if they were being mean, or, or if they were scared of her, and I'm not saying any of those reasons are good to tie a child to a chair.
Exactly, but
when you hear things out of context, it's really hard to decipher what the situation was. But there's just a lot. It was a sad story too, and that's really what I wanted to. I didn't want it to be sad. It was, that's the nature.
It is what it is.
Story, yeah. And really, the listening to the family talk about it, I really wanted to capture that, and the fact that they were, good people, especially Jerry. He just seemed like, by the end of it, I almost felt like I was friends with him. It's because you felt like you really got to know, the people involved here, because I was just lucky to have so much of it documented the way it was, which was the other truly unique thing about the case. You rarely have this kind of documentation, not just as evidence and proof, but as insight and the way various people reacted, and all the different emotions that the people went through and whatnot. So it's just it has a lot of texture to it, the case itself, and it was written about. It's it's in a number of books written about. It's just nobody really had the story. And when I found Boyce Beatty's name in one of the later newspapers, that he was an investigator, and called him and asked him, do you mind talking about the case? Do you know about it? And he said, yes, that was me. And I said, do you have access to the tapes? And he says, I think so. They're in a box in my basement. And of course, that was the gold mine there, when he gave me 22 cassettes filled on both sides, and reel-to-reel that had 8 hours of police officer interviews, from the Bridgeport Police Department. So that was kind of documentation you rarely have, and to that degree, degree of people, so.
Yeah. And plus, there's a lot of photographs. I guess you got those from Boyle, too, I think, or the majority of them?
From Boyce, yes. Those
Boyce,
were taken. Yeah, during the investigation, or like a picture of the family. Of course, they had supplied that to him, and but yeah, he had all those files, and then of course the newspapers, were
Hmm.
things that I dug up, and but yeah, I tried to make it the way I like things, and I really love to see the pictures and stuff because they kind of really give you a context to the story and kind of makes you feel more involved with it. So.
Oh, well, not only that, as I was looking at the pictures and reading the story, I was going, oh my goodness, she needs a feng shui expert. That's what went wrong. Because there was a
Right?
lot in that teeny weeny little house.
Oh my
and,
goodness.
you
Yeah.
know, and perhaps the energy could have flowed freer. Not that it would have changed the poltergeist activity, but perhaps it would have flowed freer by, a little feng shui or something a little different. Now, at some point, they brought in Paul Eno and Ed and Lorraine Warren. When did that happen, and what did they do?
Well, it was a little after lunchtime on the day when the story was breaking. And what I mean by story breaking, there was police cars in front of the house and fire engines in front of the house. And it was a neighbor that had seen Ed and Lorraine Warren at a lecture. A neighbor was the one that called and got Ed on the phone and said, could you come down? We got this haunted house. And Ed said, well, I'm in the, kind of in the middle of a case. And they said, well, this is the real thing. There's, the police are here and fire engines. I mean, there's a lot of activity here. So then he said, okay, we'll come over. And they came over with Father Charbonneau, who was a priest from Middlebury, Connecticut, that they worked with from time to time. And
Hmm.
Paulino was a 21-year-old seminary student. He was on his way there to have dinner because he was friends with them. They read a paranormal article that he wrote, and they really liked it. And, so they got to know each other. And he was going over there for dinner and ended up meeting in there, and Lorraine said, "You feel in a spiritual state?" And he said, "Oh, he knew he was going to be dragged into something." And so they all went over to Lindley Street, and that's how they got involved. And uh, Jerry Jerry and Laura were a little hesitant on letting them all in. They didn't know who they were, but friends of the family who were there did know and said, "Oh yeah, we know them. Not personally, but we know of them, and they help with situations like that." So he figured, what the heck? Come on in. We had the police here. They didn't know what to do. We had the fire department here. They didn't know what to do. So
Hmm.
they really didn't know what next. So they said, hey, if they're here and they might help, why not? Because it's getting pretty crazy. And so that's when they got involved, and they were good comfort to the family. And as you see in the book, Father Charbonneau later tried to get some sense into Laura as far as trying to follow some of the recommendations to try to bring peace to the family, to make that energy dissipate and get things back to normal. Um, and so that was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and this isn't. People know that I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, but I'm not really dissing any religion when I say this. But I notice that the more heavily people hold on to the tenets of religion, the more they experience weird things happening, whether it's this poltergeist or other weird things in their life. And if people are a little bit more loosey goosey, they kind of get through life okay. Not that, they never experience anything weird, but it's not as pronounced as what this family went through.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think sometimes maybe that's the if you're giving it attention, and by it just in general, the supernatural or paranormal, or but especially these, what I would call parasites, these kind of entities or this kind of energy,
Hmm.
definitely seems to be attracted to those who give it attention, which of course is why we say don't play with Ouija boards. And so, it's not because Ouija boards themselves are a problem. It's whenever you give these things, they thrive on attention, and it's almost like little children. If you ignore them, then they step it up a notch, and I think religion also is a way that these things recognize they can kind of poke your buttons rather easily.
Uh-huh.
If you're putting crosses all over and it's of great importance to you, and now the things are moving, if that impacts you emotionally, more than a chair tipping over, that certainly can have a heightened, impact. And of course, that just
Uh-huh.
helps escalate everything.
Yeah.
But I know it happens the other way too. But I'm just talking out
Right.
loud to
Yeah.
your point.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
just going based on my experiences.
yeah. But
Which
what's interesting in this case is, anecdotally, a lot of people were saying, oh, it seems to really attack religious items, but scientifically, because Boyce tabulated all the events, religious items were only affected 10% of the time.
okay.
And so I thought about that because I thought that was kind of fascinating, and the only conclusion I came up with is I think you remember. I think it's a bigger impact. When a cross pulls itself from the wall with a nail in it, and your religious family. I mean, that has a bigger impact than a chair falling over. That's thinking out loud. I just think that those kinds of things were more memorable to anybody who was witnessing phenomena. Not that they didn't remember, TV floating and some of the other things, that
Or
refrigerator,
the
of
chair
course.
that we're sitting in floating, just those little
Right.
small things that go on every day, right?
Exactly. Right. But I mean, as far as a chair falling over or table flipping, and those are, of course, incredibly scary on their own. But I think just people remember and have that impact when it's a religious item, or at least they did in those cases. That would be the only thing I could think of,
Okay.
or they count it differently. If a chair falls over a million times, maybe they only count that once, as a chair incident.
Still, I'm out of there. Now, after all of this was said and done, the police were mandated to participate in a scientific investigation after it was publicly announced that this was a hoax. Can you tell us what came out of all of that?
Well, that was the investigation that Boyce Beatty undertook. He's a parapsychologist, and he was helped by Jerry Sullivan and Keith Harari from Duke University, and they were the ones who did the interviews. They called Jerry Sullivan called up the police to speak to the chief, and he expected to get the go pound sand, and instead Inspector Clark said, thank God you called, come on in here as soon as you can. And he
Hmm.
met with him the next morning. He was quite surprised to get that kind of reception. And he said, hey, we'll do whatever you need to help the family, because they knew it was real. He said,
Hmm.
we'll set up a conference room here. You tell me who you want to speak to. We'll call them off the street if we have to. I mean, imagine that. Well, actually, if they're on this, if they're doing something out there, we'll call them back to be interviewed.
Hmm.
Um, whatever you need, and we'll make it mandatory. So that's what they did. They set up a conference room, and Officer Joe Tomek, was the first police officer that I interviewed before I even found Boyce, and he
Hmm.
was he was puzzled because he told me, he said, "Oh, I was forced to be interviewed," and he really didn't understand by whom. He didn't know a lot around it other than he was forced to be interviewed. Um, not that he was kicking and screaming or refusing, but he remembered
Yeah.
that he was told it was mandatory, and that puzzled him because he didn't know the other side of the story. So I mean, that was interesting, and that made me feel good that I was able to bring closure to some of those witnesses by saying, you didn't know what this was, and this is who did it and why, and what they were doing. But that's what came out of it was um, interviews with I forget how many, but it was definitely over 40 people on tape, and then And then there were incident sheets for every incident made out. So if you had 6 people viewing the same incident, each one of them are interviewed about it, and each one of them tells, where were you, where was everybody in the room, and they had a sheet made up on it. So, and that's a rarity to have so many.
Uh-huh. Are you still there, Bill? Okay, I guess not.
Back now.
Hello?
Monique, you're muted now.
Hello?
Bill, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, I don't know, talking about these spirits, I don't know what happened, but I lost you for a moment. And I'm going, Bill,
Yeah.
Bill?
I know.
Okay, well, I guess they didn't want us to talk about that. So let's go to a different direction. Okay. You had mentioned earlier that there was an underground spring under the house. And I think I remember reading that the house was kind of like downhill or downwind, if you will, from the cemetery, and that the same spring ran through the cemetery. And there was a school of thought that might be the issue. Was there anything investigated further on that they could say that, yeah, there was some type of energy coming from the cemetery?
The cemetery itself wasn't looked at or examined because, the Warrens and the priests there just, said it was an evil spirit, and that was that.
Uh-huh.
So it really wasn't looked at in that kind of way. I do know in a lot of these cases, we see that there's a water source of some sort nearby, very close, a lake or stream, something like that. So the underground spring, I think, from a energy conducting point of view, certainly I would think would be one of the elements there. I don't know about the graveyard being connected. I really didn't. I didn't put a lot of thought into that, but it could be. It was pretty close. It was pretty close and back there, but it wasn't right in their backyard either. So,
Okay.
but I think underground spring certainly was interesting. As a matter of fact, I was given a lecture, and one of the other guys who was lecturing with me, he said in all his cases he's seen these water sources, and he was actually puzzled by Lindley Street because he said, I don't you're killing my theory here because should be a water source somewhere. And I said there was an underground spring, and he's like, oh boy, here he thought, he's like, oh, you're killing me. What's because I'm always seeing something there. So there was that. There was also a lot of power lines around the house, and Bridgeport is known for its sandy soils and high water tables. You had all these like kind of electromagnetic conductors there. Certainly we know those aren't the only things, and there's might be some things, of course, that we haven't discovered yet. But it looks like it was definitely prone to that sort of stuff, or was ripe for the final element or elements to enter in there that the family brought to the table, or Marcy in particular. So,
But with everything that's gone on in that house, you would think there'd be more activity on that street, period. And it didn't, from what I read, I didn't seem to grasp that there was a lot going on elsewhere. In fact, there was either a close friend or policeman that was right across the street, that lived across the street to help them, and they didn't seem to experience that type of activity.
No, they did not. But I did find 3 other houses right nearby that did have activity at the time. So you're right.
Okay.
There was yeah, there was more, and there may even be more than that, of course, because I
Mhm.
couldn't find everybody on on the street, but uh, I did find three that I knew of, and one of those stories was put into the book in the back, telling that experience. Certainly, nowhere's near the kind of experience the Goodins had,
Mhm.
and even entities weren't described as the same. Some of the same elements, but some of those
Mhm.
elements we see a lot, like footsteps and door
Right.
knocking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you're right. There were other houses on that street, three that we know of, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was more. There were some people who contacted me that said that they had some problems and they were a few blocks away, but I didn't include that because I don't know if that's related or that just what happens to be or how far they were and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But
Mhm.
but you're definitely right. There was more on that street, and may perhaps that would have been better explored today.
Mhm.
I don't, they weren't really looking for it back then.
Yeah.
And Paul, Paul mentions that. If I knew then what I think I know now, he says to me, he says, I would have thought of looking, to see who else was affected, in that area
Mhm.
because of all those conditions that seemed, and just because it happened there or something was open that, very likely it was affecting, somebody else somewhere, very close by. So,
Mhm.
he had mentioned that and was fascinated that, that I did find that there was, some other activity there because they simply didn't do that because their whole theory was different. So they
Mhm.
weren't going to really look for that.
Okay. Well, what eventually happened to the residents of that house at that time? Like where are they today?
You mean the Goodins?
Mhm.
Well, the Goodins, I mean, they ended up staying in the home till till they died, basically.
Mhm.
Not Marcy, of course. She moved out. We expect she moved out as a 18 or 19, right around there. But
Mhm.
yeah, but the Goodins wanted to sell the house and get out of town, not just because even after the poltergeist activity ended, because they wouldn't have
Mhm.
stayed. They wouldn't have stayed in the house if it continued. They probably would have just abandoned the house or did something, lived with his brother or something like that.
Mhm.
Uh, but even though it ended, they wanted to get out because it was really sad what people were doing. I mean, they were vandalizing their car and pulling their laundry from the line and throwing things at the house. And Jerry was being picked on at work, and
Mhm.
it was just they wanted to get out of town. It was
Yeah.
like, okay, the poltergeist is gone, but now we got the humans to deal with.
Yeah.
Uh, but they couldn't. They tried to sell it; it wouldn't sell. I think
You think?
right, right. Well, not just I mean, talk about a bad house to sell. You got a high price because Jerry put a lot of work into it, and then it's 738 square feet, so it's this
Mhm.
tiny little house, and then it was haunted. So I mean, it didn't have a lot going
Hello?
for it. Yeah.
Oh, forget about location, 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 right? It's
And it wasn't a great location, so add that to it too.
Mhm.
Uh, but so instead, they got rid of these iconic swans that were out there that the crowd had seen them moving by themselves
Mhm.
with swan planters. So they got rid of them.
Yeah,
Besides,
well,
people.
I got to cut you off, but what's really eerie about the swans? I have a neighbor who is an interesting lady, and about the time I was reading this book, I noticed, and she went out, and she's a very finicky lady. She has to be extremely clean. Reminds me of Laura, but anyway, she went out and bought swans and put them in the front yard, and I was like, oh shit.
Oh my God, that's so
you know,
funny.
because it was the same time I was reading the book, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if they move, I'm out of here.
Goodness. Oh,
Oh.
that's
Um,
funny.
Paul, is the house still there today?
It is. Yeah, it is still there. There, as far as we know, there was no activity before or after. I heard rumors that somebody had lived in there and there was activity and they moved out, but it didn't seem to coincide with what the neighbors told me. A little old Portuguese woman lives there, and she's been there. She was the only resident since the Goodins, and she's been there about 14 years. Doesn't know anything about the background of the house. I was told the children bought the house for her, and,
Here, Ma.
yeah, right. And it's funny because I'm talking to the neighbor and he says, well, this explains why she calls me now and then and says people are taking pictures of the house or walking on the property, and I thought the property was abandoned because they had this rusty chain on the front of the house, and he goes, oh yeah, she only used the back door, and I'm like, oh geez. And then he goes, there was somebody here just a week ago, she's calling me saying some guy was walking around the property. I'm like, oh geez, that was me, So once I learned that, I didn't bother the lady anymore. I still want to get in the house though, so I'm trying to talk to the neighbor to say, hey, could you, introduce me to her? Because I would have really loved to, give a lecture in the house. Imagine that, being able to say, there's where this happened, and
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to fit a lot of people, but it would be it'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it definitely would be interesting. Well, I hope that you have the opportunity to meet the lady and go inside the house. And folks, if you're curious at all, you can go to Google Earth and look it up. It's 966 Lindley, is it Lindy or Lindley? Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. 966 Lindley Street, Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. But don't bother the lady, okay? Because that's not cool.
Yeah, I scared her enough, so.
Yeah. So, Bill, I know that you do all kinds of work. How can people connect with you? What is it that you offer to folks?
The one-stop place to go is worldsmosthauntedhouse.com, and that has an event calendar. It has some free items for listeners. It has links to where you can buy the book, or you can buy it at any Barnes and Noble or independent bookseller, and some other neat stuff there. So hopefully that they'll enjoy it there. But that's the one place to go for everything, and you can contact me there, etc. So.
Okay. Now, if somebody is experiencing something that they feel is a little abnormal in their home, what advice would you give to them?
Try to. Well, I guess it depends on what they're experiencing it, but I would say try to get others to see it or document it. Try to eliminate the obvious, and be careful with photos because if you're using a flash, for example, you basically can't trust anything that comes out in a photo. I'm not talking about fraud. I'm talking there's just so many reflections of things that get confused, so you could end up scaring yourself over nothing. If you go to the graveyard with a camera with a flash and take pictures, you're gonna get all sorts of things, but none of it's gonna be paranormal. Well, I shouldn't say none of it. You just never know. But I mean, I would say chances are, unless you have a photo expert look at it, you're dealing with light reflections. But I think it depends what it is. And then if you're really having trouble, then certainly there's many groups to contact there. Just be careful of people who want to make fanfare out of it versus help you.
I know. Isn't it amazing that people always want to come in and take advantage of you when you're having the most difficult time? It just boggles my mind what people would want to do that.
Hey, look, we got all this evidence. This is great. Oh, good luck. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. But and I understand the curiosity part of it. I mean, that's we're all curious, and that's a good thing. But and I don't see there's anything wrong with people trying to collect evidence at the same time. But hopefully help the family too.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, Bill, I'd like for you, if you're willing to do this for me, to go to my website, and that's MoniqueChapman.com, and go to the Holistic Healing link and click on the Spirit Release, and then go about halfway down the page. You're going to see after a ton of pictures, you're going to see two pictures. And I would love for you to look at it and tell me your professional opinion if either one of these pictures you feel is a light reflection. These were pictures that were taken by my youngest when he was 9 at a party for his grandma. And I'm not going to say any more than that. If you're willing to take a look, I'd love for you to take a look and have your feedback. I'd love to have your feedback. But in the meantime, I do appreciate your time and you being here. I don't know if you could look it up in the next 30 seconds and make a comment, because that's about what we got. But I do appreciate you being here with me tonight.
Thank you.
So when you write your follow-up book, definitely let me know. We'll have you back on because you're a lot of fun.
And, thank you. Yeah, it's coming out in August, and that's it's a very interesting case. It's like a paranormal flap, basically, almost like a paranormal crossroads. And there's a family there that's just had all sorts of things in their house. Luckily, it's not 100% negative things, or else they'd be gone. But definitely just very, very fascinating. And the mother of the house kept a diary since the 1950s. So that's what it's going to be about. So.
Okay. Well, I got to go. I got to scoot. I'm out of time. But thank you very much, Bill, for being with me. We'll be in touch. And thank you to the audience for being with me. I do appreciate your time and attention. And when you're ready to shift your life to the master level, give me a call at 888-240-6057 or email me at Monique@MoniqueChapman.com. Love yourself enough to make an investment in yourself. And remember, the most important choice that you make is what you choose to make important. Abundant blessings, light, and love to all. Namaste.